Hi everyone and welcome to this video. Today's topic is going to be something very interesting, especially for those who are working on a day-to-day basis hands-on with athletes. And today's topic is all about assessments. Not just the traditional topic of assessments where we're just talking about different testing methods and protocols, but more importantly, how do you do them, when do you do them, and why do you do them? All of these factors are very important to consider, especially when you're working with athletes, irrespective of their demographic, age, gender, sport, all of these factors, because sometimes all of us tend to get a little too caught up in the idea of assessing things and putting things into certain objective parameters. So let's get started. So just based on the general experience of strength and conditioning coaches or support staff, uh, how essential are fitness assessments in determining individuals' training path? And would you say that one can succeed even without doing any assessments?
For this, the answer we'd have to look for is that before maybe sports science came in, right, before it really developed into what it is today, there were players still playing and they were still participating and winning and maybe sometimes losing. So what that implies is that ultimately winning is what matters in sport, in the technical arena. Now those who do fitness assessments, like when we do maybe the yo-yo test, do a push-up test, do a 1 RM bench press, squat, so many variables, right? You do all these different tests. What is the aim behind it? Now, there are some tests from a physical point of view post surgery in a physiotherapy clinic when those are done. Those are done to make sure that the person, we kind of get an idea that their balance is back to normal. And we're talking about balance, which is for normal movement, just for walking, sitting, driving a car. There are many tests that they do, just to check the range of motion, just to make sure that the joint has its sort of, proprioception back. These are basic tests which are done to get you back to the normal level of functioning. Now, at a supernormal level, when we're talking about somebody like an athlete, say, who's into a sport that we often talk about, badminton, which is a real high-paced sport, speed, everything's involved. Now, if we are going to make a badminton player do a test, which is for their balance. Now, here we are talking of this player who moves at such high speeds, gets into very awkward positions, is able to hit a shot, move to the net, play another shot. And then we're going to test them for something which is done by putting some tapes, and we are going to tell them stand on one leg, put one forward, one back. Now, is that really applicable? First is that point that we have to ask. And secondly, we have to ask that even if not that test, let's assume we make them do something very exclusive, something new, which is even more fancier and maybe much harder. Does that translate directly to the sport? And if we take an example of a test such as the yo-yo test done for checking cardiovascular endurance, if somebody passes that with flying colors, it's really amazing. Does that mean they'll play good cricket or football? Is that a given? And if it's not a given, if it's not so sure, like even after doing the test, we cannot predict that somebody will play good, then we have to ask, why are we doing the test? So we are doing the test to mainly check on the physical capacity from a health perspective. Are they healthy? And then after health comes, are they fit? And fit comes to a point where we have to know that yes, you can test to know if the person is fit, but that does not mean that you ever use that to judge a person's performance. Okay. So can a test be used? Yes, it should be used for our reference. So we know that maybe, when you start with a player and the player sort of over time, say 3 months later, has moved from a certain amount of weight that he used to lift to maybe an X amount which is higher. That's for our reference. We don't have to let the player know that this is the weight you have to lift in 3 months. So I think this becomes the main thing for a strength and conditioning coach to know. That tests are okay, but they are not so important that if the player is not improving in those tests, or that if those tests are being done and you find that the results have been slightly poor, you don't have to take a decision to say that the player is not fit to play, because to play they have to be fit to play the technical part. Somebody could run and pass all the tests and then they are not able to play. So whom will the coach and the manager pick? Will they pick somebody who's got the game, or will they pick somebody who's got the fitness? So it's important, but we have to know how important. It's just like how our role is important, but we have to know how important. We are there as support staff. So these tests are also a support to the technical training. These tests should not replace the main technical aspect.
So, delving into the world of testing a little more specifically, what are some things that one should keep in mind, especially when it comes to conducting as well as interpreting musculoskeletal testing?
Okay, now testing which is done, whether it's physical testing, or whether it's any form which is musculoskeletal, to check what would be called as imbalances. So now, if we are testing and then we find that maybe one shoulder is a bit more depressed than the other, we find that there's maybe the scapulae are not in their ideal position. The scapulothoracic rhythm, when it's checked, is not the most ideal for one shoulder compared to the other. Now, what we have to ask is, firstly, which sport is that athlete playing? If that athlete is playing a sport which is one side dominant, it is bound to be. You cannot have both the sides equal. When they are going to use this arm for life, they have used this arm. If it's a table tennis player who plays these shots, if it's a tennis player who serves with so much power, we can't expect this shoulder and this shoulder to be equal. It would be just, I think, not right from any perspective. So we have to be very clear that these assessments, again, if somebody does, you do it for your reference to check how the shoulder was when you started, and has it improved? Is the range better? Is the strength better? If the strength is better. But it should not be something where we do a test and tell the athlete that, okay, your right shoulder seems, your internal rotation in the right shoulder is not as good as it's on the left. And we often see this with, you check with players who are, doing one side dominant sports. They will not have the same range here as this. If they are right-handed, it will be lesser. Generally, internal rotation will be lesser. They will not be able to go behind and clasp their hands like how it's done in a Gomukhasana, for example. They won't. Now, does that mean there's a huge problem? I would say that's more like an occupational hazard. It's part of sport. You've done that occupation and this is a hazard. It's like somebody who is working with computers all day long in this. They will tend to have generally a bit of bad posture, but they have to also earn a living from doing that. We just can't go and say that, oh, your posture's bad, don't go and sit with computers. So same appears with this aspect of musculoskeletal screening. We have to understand that some muscles, some joints will get stiff. So whatever tests we do and interpret, it has to be just for our reference to compare from what we have done in the past. It should not be to compare with somebody else or to say that your left shoulder should be the same as your right. And often you get these readings, and many times, a lot of strength coaches, sometimes even physiotherapists, get caught up in this whole thing of one leg is shorter than the other. Now, how short is it? Is it a medical problem where we have to show a doctor and maybe insoles are required? Is it that short where their gait is getting affected? Or is it just short to the point where it's negligible? So that again becomes a question we have to ask. And I think what a lot of times with these assessments, they are very tempting, to assess somebody and tell them this is wrong with you, this is right with you. But as a body, as humans, we are not designed and we are not built to be equal on both sides. You check any person's right arm, left arm, whether it's the bicep muscle, whether it's forearms, whether it's your legs, there's nothing which is the same. One side will have some discrepancy. One calf will be slightly bigger. If one looks at athletes who are into aesthetic training like bodybuilding and stuff, who are very who have muscles which are completely ripped and you can see every sort of striation out there. Sometimes you check the abdominals, okay, the rectus abdominis, and when you have the sort of the six-pack, what's called, now when you look at the line that separates them, the inscription, that is there, you will notice sometimes that pack, what we call, would be higher than the other. Okay, it is not that they are built equally both sides. Now does that mean there's a problem? No, that's how human body is. If we delve further into it, we have to ask, if it was meant to be equal, we would have had two livers, one on this side, one on the other side. We would have had two hearts, right? We would have had our intestines sort of spread out in the same way on the right and left. Does it happen inside the body like that? No. So sometimes we get too obsessed in sort of making sure that it's all equalized. But we have to look deep inside and check, is it actually equal inside? Is that how a human being is born, and is that what we sort of tend to aim for? So once that is clear, then we know that being imperfect is part of sport. A person who plays golf, their hip over time, if we look at the pelvis, there will be some difference. There might be some lateral tilting. That's okay. We can't tell them to stop playing golf, especially if it's a professional player or if it's a badminton player. You can't tell them to stop, to say that, okay, now your shoulders will get equal. Then you're not a sports person. Something else to remember here for a lot of people is that sport is not done so that we have equal development on both sides. That's not the target. The target of sport is to master a skill with an equipment or with their own body, right? And if you're going to play with a cricket bat, and if you're going to play this shot, and over the years with the amount of swings you do, there will be one side from where, when you rotate, one side which will be pulling a bit more, the other side not as developed. Now you're not going to tell that person that you have to now play 5 shots this side and 5 shots the other side, so that's equality. Equality is something, I think, which we create by ourselves, to assume that this musculoskeletal assessment is so important. And coming to another point regarding this, if we take any person, and I many times bring this to the notice of a lot of young athletes, young players as well, we could take any person from any sport right now, okay, the world champion in swimming, the world champion in football, I mean the best of the best, and we can get all these guys and do assessments and find faults in them. Okay, so we can find faults in any person, the best of the best. Is the medal out there for the person who finds faults, or is the medal for the athlete who has been helped by somebody to become better? So as support staff, we are there to support, to improve, not support to find faults. So this becomes crucial to understand, because I have seen a lot of times, a lot of physiotherapists, a lot of strength coaches get so obsessed to the point where they forget why they did the testing. It almost becomes like as if you have done the testing to tell the player what's wrong with them. The player wants to know what's right with them, because there's always something wrong. It's like learning strokes in, say, a sport like cricket or badminton. There's always something more that you can learn, but that's not what gets you the best places, right? You are able to use what you have. Okay, so there's no player out there in any sport who has all the strokes. There's always something more they could have done, but what they have is what makes them better. Same goes with the body. What you don't have is not what's going to make you better. What you have, you have to learn how to use it. So this part we have to understand, that the body, we have to, as support staff, involve in it in such a way that we can improve it. Do testing, do musculoskeletal assessments for your reference, not to tell the player that this is wrong with you. And this can actually have a negative impact on a lot of players, because when we tell them that something's wrong with them, they can think like, oh, my shoulder, I mean, there's a problem with my shoulder. It's a bit depressed, and sort of, I have a shoulder issue, because the player doesn't realize, what is the whole idea behind this testing. And the player can it can create a very negative impact, to think that they have some issue. In my own practice that I have done over the years, I don't follow musculoskeletal screening for athletes, and for the simple reason that I don't want to put any doubts in their head. Now, do I make observations? Absolutely, yes. There are different observations you make, over time with players. You understand some players have this weakness. You work on it without them knowing. It should not be a result which I give to somebody and say, this is not there in you, this is wrong in you. And one important point I'll say here, and this might make a lot of people think, and it should make us think. Let's assume, for argument's sake, let's assume that musculoskeletal assessments are amazing. They do work. Maybe I'm wrong when I say, that it's not there. When I tell that somebody has, all people have some imbalances and this, that, maybe I'm wrong. So I would want to know, and I've asked this at conferences, I would want people to show me someone who is perfect. And if we as people are going to pick out faults in athletes and tell them this is wrong, your left hip has a bit of lateral tilt, uh, your one leg is shorter than the other, you have a bit of an anterior pelvic tilt, you have a bit of your thoracic spine needs more mobility. So we can have these faults done. I can agree that is there, fine. What if somebody asks the person who's testing, the strength coach or the physiotherapist, why don't you prove it on yourself and show exactly what's the ideal?
Right.
When you know the science, right, and we know it all, why can't you do it by yourself? Why can't you prove that this is what I can sort of do and show this is the ideal body, how it should be, equally balanced? And we are talking about strength coaches and physiotherapists who do these tests, who don't even play a one-side dominant sport. So it should be much easier for them. So when you can't do it on yourself, right, and when there's no ideal out there, what are we trying to do? So this assessment, what is it grading, what is it testing against? Okay, so that's why it's very important when before people ask us such questions, we should have the answers, that not to confuse people, because if anybody has to say this to any person who's testing, that if this is wrong with me, please show it on yourself. I want to see in 3 months or 4 months or 5 months, if you're not already perfect, I want you to show me what's the ideal body, which you say is ideal, both sides equal, this, that. I mean, is it possible? So these are very reflective questions we have to ask, which are sometimes not taught in courses in various degrees. We are just told that this is how we have to test and we have to get, and then we infer that this is the result. But we have to ask ourselves, is it really making sense? Is there something out there which is perfect? And if not, then what are we chasing? What are we trying to get out of these tests? So I think, yeah, that clarity is important, to know that there's nothing perfect. Your aim is to improve. And if a test is done to improve, then it's perfect. If a test is done to make somebody perfect, it's not going to happen.
So, further going into testing, when is the optimal time to conduct a fitness test? Should it be like a constant process, or are there key moments in an athlete's journey where it's particularly crucial to do these testing?
Again, something like a fitness test, which I've spoken earlier, because it is so subjective, it has to be done when you feel it's right. Now, let's assume an athlete comes to a person who's had a shoulder surgery and has come back post their physiotherapy. Would you want them to be doing a bench press 1 RM, the first time they come? Now, from a sort of regular answer, one would say yes, of course, because how else do we know that they're improving their muscle strength? But from a common sense point of view, does it make sense? Obviously, no. So, a lot of times you don't have to do tests which are going to be risky. Okay, so rather than asking, I would say, or rather than saying when to do a test, I would say when not to do. One should not do a test when somebody is coming back from injury. Don't do any test which is specially maximal. We are testing the person. It need not be a heavy load test like a bench press. It could even be a test like a yo-yo test. But don't do it when somebody's come back post a knee surgery or knee injury, and then you're testing them straight to run, because the knee in this case, though they are running slow initially, towards the end it's still being tested. The whole body is being tested to its max. So don't do anything which is maximal for somebody who's coming back from injury. Now, for somebody who doesn't have an injury, okay, they are okay, they've been practicing, don't do a test too close to a competition, because again there's a risk. The fact that these are maximal tests, one might push the body to the point to get a good score and pull a muscle.
Right.
And this happens with especially 1 RM lifts. People end up trying something, a deadlift for example, they pull their back. They try a bench press, they can mess their shoulder. And when everybody is being tested, there's that whole sort of team thing where all the sports people want to push. And as you're testing, if somebody messes up there, then the whole work goes off. So testing, we have to realize, is to be done when there's enough time to do a retest.
Right.
So if a test is done, I would say there should be a time at least of 2 weeks to be able to test again. So then at least there's safety, and then you have some sort of improvement that you can see. And that test should also be done when you know that players will be with you monitored. Sometimes this can happen. Players go back home maybe for holidays or for some time off, They come back, and then occasionally maybe a strength coach might say, oh, I want you to do this test just to know whether you were training at home. Now here again comes the choice between us. We can be like somebody who doesn't listen to the athlete and say, I don't care where you went, you should have trained. Or we can have the wisdom to think that the person was on holiday, maybe hasn't trained, so that when they come back for training, we slowly get them back into training. Then we decide as experts that I think he's ready or she is ready now for testing, rather than coming back and making it sound like as if it's an entry pass, where you come and I'm testing you today. And the next thing, what the person tries their maximal sort of effort, something goes off, the lower back, the knee, anything. So we are the ones who have to decide. We have to use our wisdom to know where tests matter, how much time, and there's no standard rule, there's no worldwide rule that this has to be done. If we go looking for tests, there are various physical tests out there. There's a whole book, and there's manuals out there with tests out on the internet. You can create your own test as well, but then you have to ask, how much sense does it make? How much testing do you want to do? And how much training do you want to do? You have 1 hour, 1.5 hours with an athlete. How much of it you want to spend on testing? And how much of it is going to be helpful? I'm going to share one example here, and this should help a lot of athletes, even coaches and strength coaches and physiotherapists to understand. There was a player I worked with, high level player, and this player was a badminton player, or is a badminton player rather. And I remember there was a point in time when this player lost a few matches. Okay, things were not going correct. So there was, obviously everybody was stressed, how come this player has not played good now. So some of the assumptions that were made by the coaches was that their cardiovascular endurance is poor, their stamina is down. Right. So then it was decided that, okay, we have to do a test. So then there was a yo-yo test done. And I think his result was somewhere around 19 or so. Right. So the coaches decided that this is not good. As a badminton player, it should be somewhere around maybe 21 or so that there's some decent sort of level of fitness, or maybe even 22. Right. And there was a lot of stress, so we did that, and when the test was done and the results came out, even I was a bit surprised that it was not the best that we expected. So at this moment, I told the player that, look, we have to start adding these runs so that you improve. And the player told me that in the past, how his stamina has been high is because he used to get a lot of good sparring matches against good players during camps and stuff. So I said, okay, fine. Now what do we do? You don't have those sparring partners now. So the player told me that I'll be off for around 2.5 weeks, and that's when I'll be getting some, he moved on to another country for a while and got some very good sparring practice. And during this period, he said, no, that let's not train too hard. And I can assure and I can say this, that not once did we do any running from this period to the whole time that he came back. He came back, he played, and he played some of his best matches from that point. And we did a test after he came back. And his test results from around 19 point something, it went up to, if I'm not wrong, 22.1 or something like that. Not once was there any running done. And that is the day I learned that I have to also learn from students. Right. Because what he had said was that the stamina, what he had earlier when he was playing very good before the results, that is the time he used to do a lot of high intensity practice matches with players of a certain level, and that helps. And I thought maybe it might not work, but I listened. Right. And it worked. And not once did we run, but he improved in the yo-yo test. Now if somebody has to ask, like technically it should be that you want to improve a yo-yo test, you have to run. Right. How did this player improve? Because here we have to realize that badminton in itself is a high endurance anaerobic test. There's almost so much of anaerobic work that happens with lots of fast-paced movements. So we have to understand that the sport itself also has components of fitness. Right. Sometimes their fitness goes down because they have not trained the sport itself. So we have to keep an eye open to learn these things. Correct. What if maybe at that moment I had pushed this player and said, okay, you're bad now, your score is bad, we have to run. Every day I push him. and sort of, make him run. He's so tired that he runs. Now he can't practice, and he would have not been able to probably practice with those high level players as much. So I allowed him. We still did our strength work. We did some basic cardiovascular, but he came back, and this was probably one of the biggest lessons I have learned in strength and conditioning, that somebody can improve in a yo-yo test by not running at all.
Right.
And this doesn't make sense. If somebody has to listen to this, it just doesn't make sense how this player could have improved his scores without running.
Correct.
But this is what sport is, and that's why our ears have to be open, our mind has to be open to listen.
Right.
So one of the points which I have said earlier also, we have to have the principle or the philosophy of observation and the philosophy of listening.
Right.
And I think these are two things which generally probably we do less.
Right.
Because the player telling you, you think like, what do you know? I'm the sports science expert. I'm the strength and conditioning specialist. Are you telling me how a yo-yo test improves? Okay. But if I listen, it allows. If I observe, I learn. So I think that is where a lot of these type of incidents will happen with other sports professionals as well. But we have to allow it to happen.
Correct.
You can allow, but if you think you know it all and that's it, the athlete knows nothing, that itself can be a problem many times.
So just as a follow-up, now that you mentioned when testing should be done, how do we actually pick the test that has to be done?
It has to depend on the sport. Which sport requires what? So if you are doing a 1 RM, it can be done for sports that require maximal strength and power. So maybe they are athletics, and athletics, of course, they are common where you do heavy squats. 100-meter sprinters do that because that's the quality they want to work on. So somebody who's used to lifting that heavy, you can test.
Right.
And again, with a lot of concern and a lot of safety precautions, because what you don't want is somebody to get injured in a test.
Right.
So it can be done for those who are used to those exercises.
Right.
You can't make a weightlifter maybe do a Cooper test if that weightlifter is not used to running.
Right.
So you have to know exactly what the athlete is used to doing, and then test that. Don't try a test which the athlete is not used to. That itself can be a problem. So choosing tests is according to the sport. A yo-yo test does make sense for a badminton player because the activity is very similar. The runs are similar. But still, with whatever is done, we have to understand that there's always going to be movement patterns in sport which are very different to what happens in fitness. From a running perspective, and you'll agree with this because you would have seen this as well, and many people who are there will agree. A sport like badminton, when I started off, I assumed, badminton, so what are the qualities that they should need from a fitness point of view? Explosiveness. What are some of the movements they do? They hit a smash, so explosiveness comes there. They would need good adductor strength. They would need a good power to lunge, and they would sort of need to come back from there. So now a fitness professional who's probably never watched a game of badminton would think that, okay, we have to do lunges. That's how you work and you get strong. So then you do right, left, right, left. In badminton, do people lunge with their left foot?
Right.
Now this is something, unless a person watches and is there, they will never know. Because somebody who's just done a course in strength and conditioning or sports science will just assume that how do you get strong for badminton lunging? You do right, left, right, left. Now you do it, but you should know that in the sport you're only moving with your right leg.
Right.
So people should watch sport to know the movement patterns. Near the net, whether it's a forehand or whether it's near the other side, people still will have their dominant leg. Right? They will always move with this and this. So this is what people sometimes don't understand. If they are playing a shot here and they lunge, and if it's coming there, they will still lunge with their right leg. They are not going to. And I used to assume that when I started off, I had no clue. So in the beginning, because you play badminton, but you never go into the deep details. But later you realize always the same leg which is done. You don't go with the other leg. So these are things which we have to understand, and the tests have to monitor this. The tests have to sort of, whatever is tested has to be relevant. But at the same time, it also has to make sure that whatever testing is done is not going to put the athlete at risk. And any testing, I think one tip I can give is any testing that is done should make the athlete feel better about themselves. If it's going to make them feel worse about themselves, then what have you really achieved? So the testing should be done to help the athlete feel better, support them in the whole endeavor.
Right.
And if we have an idea that they are not going to perform well, maybe don't do the test. Now coming to a point of, okay, what tests to do? I would give an idea here for strength and conditioning coaches to look at it for one step ahead. The tests should be relevant to the sport and they should be done from a technical point of view.
Right.
And technical point of view would be what? Like the coaches should have, maybe for a badminton player, an X amount of games that they play. And they know that this person can play maybe, in one day, maybe 2 matches, okay, morning, evening. What is it that they sort of need in a competition? If it's at national level, sometimes people even play 3 matches in a day. So then that is what you are going to test to check if they have that. And then you need recovery as well after that. So it has to match the level. Whereas an international badminton player who's really playing high level will play 1 match a day. Now this is something again a lot of people who have not been in the system don't know. They just assume that every badminton player plays a lot of matches every day, maybe 3, 4. But it's actually the other way. At the lower level you play more. Right? And if you're in the qualifying rounds, from there to get into the main draw, these are things that I think a lot of strength coaches, a lot of physiotherapists have to put in time to understand how this works. And then the points that are gained, from playing tournaments. If this is not known, then sometimes, people just make assumptions that, oh, I have done this training and with this training, I will play this match and I will win. How many matches are going to be played a day? What happens at a world championship when people play? What happens at state level? What happens at district level? What happens in a national tournament? There are tournaments where young players, when they play locally, they would have matches sometimes at 8 o'clock in the night, sometimes at 9, sometimes at 10. Okay, so it doesn't mean that we say that, oh no, but in sports science it says that you should not train too late in the evening. And this is where I think wisdom comes in, where we have to adjust and adapt because we are support staff, adapt according to the sport. Not the other way around, where we say, no, but science says, sports science says this is how you need recovery. By 10 o'clock you should be sleeping, and we tell that person to sleep and they've got a match at 9:30. So I think this is where we have to understand that testing has to adapt according to the technical part. And if there's something that can be created which the technical coach does and the strength coach or the physiotherapist observes that and gets feedback on those movements, I think that becomes much more relevant. Because then we know that this is what's going to be replicated. But if you make somebody do runs, especially somebody who's not used to maybe running that fast, like yo-yo test being done, and it's a player who in general training doesn't run, but just because you want to test fitness, you're making them do an activity which they've not been doing regularly. I mean, what are we doing? We are asking them to be tested at threshold, completely different movement which they are not used to. Or bench press, one might say to check upper body strength, we need to do a 1 RM bench press. What if somebody wants to say that, oh, I want to check, how the velocity of the bar. And there's somebody who's not been doing Olympic lifting, they are not into it, and neither has it helped them. But because we want to check the velocity, we say, no, you have to lift it. Now with that jerkiness, with that sort of kind of load on the body with high speed, do you still want to take that chance? So these are questions we have to ask. Not every answer out there is there in sports science. Some answers you have to find. Okay, and I think the smart people find out those answers by understanding about the sport and then understanding what they can add. Some people just come out of a degree and think, this is it, I have come here and I'm here to change the world. Right? And I'm here to show everybody what is sports science. And I think these are the, unknowingly, many of these young professionals get into not the best relationships with the athlete nor with the coach, because they just assume that I'm here to show you how it's done because I have studied. And I have, in some of the lectures I've said this, that you could have 5 PhDs, but the person who teaches how to do that service is more important than you if you are working with a competitive badminton player or with a table tennis or any person. Your PhDs are in sports science, but that does not mean that PhD can make an Olympic champion. The Olympic champion, the coach is extremely important to teach the strategy. Okay, so I think this part, as long as we realize we are support staff, no matter how educated we are, I think we can really contribute a lot. and we can contribute right. But when it comes to testing, like you asked, what tests, it all depends about what you know about the sport. Then you apply the right test. So understand the sport first. If you're working with basketball, understand what it is. Check what is done in worldwide, what are the norms. Some sports things are there, where yo-yo tests are done. Are they really helpful? And one thing never to be done probably is, of course, don't ever make the test so important. Even if the coach agrees with you, don't make the fitness test so important that the athlete doesn't get a chance to play in a team or in a competition because they failed a fitness test. Because that would just go against everything. If you have been playing good and if you're not taken into a team because you failed that test, I mean, that is just a sad part of it.
So another very important question, I think, which is a topic of discussion, is uh, does a champion always have to be the fittest person in the room, or in other words, what is the correlation that would come about when we talk about being a champion and being fit?
Now again, those people who have been in sport, and this goes out to young, SNC coaches, physiotherapists, over time you will realize that the champion need not be the fittest person. And as much as we would as SNC coaches especially want them to be the fittest person, okay, but that's not necessary. They have to be able to play the technical skills. And there are so many factors that come in. If they're in a team sport, the team wins. Sometimes you don't play your best, but the team plays good. Sometimes even in an individual sport, you end up trying to play your best, but you're not able to due to various factors. Or sometimes you win even though you were not at your fittest or you didn't practice much, but the opponent played bad. In sports where the role of fitness can be actually the highest is sports where power is required. Okay, and that's where comes your 100 meters sprints in athletics. We're talking about swimming, because these are sports where you have to be fit. And one of the things here we have to also understand is, if we look at 100-meter sprints, now 100-meter sprints are used in many other sports to check the speed of a person, but that 100-meter sprint is a sport in itself. So it's like, if there's a fitness test, then it's the 100-meter sprint, and imagine that's a sport, and then it is the most watched event during the Olympics. And why is it so? It's because everybody can run, right? Any person can run, and we can all try to see, but not everybody can take a hockey stick and play with the ball. Not everybody has the skills to play with a cricket bat or with a badminton racket or with a tennis racket. So sports like these, which are very basic, the contribution of strength and conditioning can be pretty high, because you are just increasing power, and that power helps them to do the skill much faster. So when it comes to contribution, in some sports it is such that the winner will be also the fittest person. That is 100-meter sprints, 50 meters in swimming. The winning person will have to have strength and power, definitely, because it is a power sport. Now at the same time, we also have to remember that in these sports you will notice that the more fitness is required, the more power is required in that particular sport. You can make that out from the structures of most of these athletes. So you see a 100-meter sprinter, that body versus a sport where not a lot of fitness requirements are there, it will be very different. And that's why swimmers, we normally say they always have very good bodies, because there is no choice in swimming to be fit, to be able to cut through the water, to have that power to propel yourself. Some of the 50-meter sprinters, if we say, have these broad shoulders, huge massive latissimus dorsi development, and it's because the sport itself is that. You see sprinters as well, who do 100 meters. So the bodies generally show what is the physical requirement. And sports where it's maybe not as high, you will notice in team sports, sometimes the players don't look the most fittest, and because they don't need the most fitness. Now here comes a choice of our test, which test to put. You don't want to make somebody who plays a sport that is not too physical or not too fitness dominant. You don't want to test high fitness there, because it doesn't serve purpose. It's more technical skill. So I think this is where our wisdom comes in as to what tests we choose, and what tests we try to do. We have to understand which sports have a high physical demand, and those sports you test safely to check that okay, fine, if it's a 100-meter sprinter, they do heavy squats, what are the effects? They do maybe plyometric jumps, what are the effects? Double leg versus single leg. But we have to understand that the sport of running itself is a test of fitness, and this brings us to another example where sort of it becomes a sport which is used for fitness, maybe correctly, incorrectly, is weightlifting moves such as the clean and jerk and the snatch. There is a sport for which you win. So when an average athlete does these two and tries to do them their fastest, it becomes a bit tricky, because we are doing two sports which are about testing your maximum power, and here there is a sport which is about testing your maximum speed. So we are then trying to use these sports to improve maybe tennis or badminton. So one has to be cautious, because a lot of times these two things can be the ones, the runs can be something responsible for a lot of hamstring tears, a lot of issues with hamstrings, and maybe the transfer of that power to that sport might not be the best. And given an example of a test like this is now a sport like badminton, okay, which is again so physically demanding, but still it's not a sport where you just accelerate. What happens in 100-meter sprint, you start, you hear the gunshot, you hear, okay, on a mark, get set, go, and then what? You accelerate, that's it, you accelerate till the end point. People keep running past the finishing line as because there's so much acceleration. Now, if somebody does a lot of 100-meter sprints, is that enough? In badminton, do you run that fast? And do you move with that foot pattern? Tennis itself, how the feet work, a person runs to the net and plays a shot. Does a badminton player run to the net, or do they have a particular footwork? So these are things we have to understand, and that though they are racket sports, the movement pattern of a badminton player versus a tennis player and a table tennis player, that itself is so different. So we can't have tests which are just common to say that these are sports tests, right? So I think this is where we have to understand that what are the tests, where do they fit in. First understand the sport, understand the player, then you know what to give, okay, and that I think becomes the ultimate aim, to make sure that the test is relevant. How do you make it? Is you have to understand what to do for that particular sport. So I cannot of course give an answer to all the sports out there right now, but you have to exactly know, are you testing flexibility, are you testing cardiovascular endurance, are you testing muscle strength, and are these the ones that are required in that particular sport.
So, sort of to just summarize everything together, and bring the whole video in a full circle, what is the single most valuable lesson or piece of advice that one should keep in mind, especially when it comes to fitness testing?
One, I would say, for any fitness testing, don't do a fitness test that will cause injury. So any fitness test should never injure a person. Second, I would say, to make sure that the fitness test is relevant, make sure that you understand the sport first. What are the movement patterns? And third, don't give any fitness test results which are going to make the player feel worse. You have to do tests which actually show what they've improved on, because everybody has some weaknesses. You don't want to do a test to show weaknesses. You want to do a test to show strengths.
So I hope that for everyone out there that you've got a lot of insight into the world of fitness testing. Not just about the how, but also the when and the why. Always remember that when it comes to testing, an athlete's safety has to be priority. And whatever you're building upon that comes secondary. Safety, always number one. And the reasoning should be very, very clear. Why is it that you're doing a test? What is the purpose of it? And also, how do you interpret the data? And does any sort of differences really mean that it's a bad thing or not? During the discussion, what we had spoken about, that sometimes if there's an asymmetry or a balance, it's important to analyze the nature of the sport or the lifestyle and see if that is a byproduct of that activity itself. So I hope that gives you a lot of clarity into the world of fitness testing, and we'll see you in the next one.